Westerly had several waves of European immigration. From different cultures, they came here to work in the granite quarries and the Pawcatuck River mills. In 1907, a British company, the Bradford Dyeing Association, purchased an old mill on the Pawcatuck River along with 800 acres. Known as the BDA, it became the largest mill and employer in Westerly. At its height during World War II, the BDA had over 1,200 workers. Fortunately, a man who worked there for over 40 years, a talented storyteller, genealogist, and historian, Dwight Brown, recorded what life was like to work at the mill. In 2018, Dwight passed away at the age of 90. I interviewed Dwight at his home in Ashaway in 2018. As far as I know, this is the only recording ever made of this remarkable man. Dwight was born in 1928, the son of Dwight Brown Sr. and Elizabeth Brown. He was a U.S. Air Force veteran and worked as plant manager for the BDA for many years. Dwight was an avid historian. He was archivist emeritus for the Westerly Historical Society and member of the Babcock Smith House Museum. He was the author of a number of books and numerous articles on Westerly's history. Starting at the age of 16, Dwight worked at the BDA for over 40 years and chronicled mill life through an extraordinary collection of 1,500 photographs. My interview with Dwight covered what mill life was like at the BDA, shipbuilding on the Pawcatuck River, and the history of Westerly. Dwight, where were you born?
Westerly.
Oh, you were born in Westerly?
Yeah.
What year was that?
1928.
So you were born in Westerly in 1928?
Yeah.
So you grew up, you've always lived in Westerly?
I lived there in Westerly until I was about, I think, 10 or 12, and when my father moved to Bradford because the rent was cheaper for anybody that could get into the housing there. I think he was paying $3 a month, and he was in one of the big houses, you know. The smaller places, they were getting $1 a month.
Yeah. Oh my God.
So, a typical a mill company at the time, you know. They took care of their people.
Yeah. What was it like growing up in Bradford in the 1930s?
I remember being in the house with a bunch of women when the hurricane struck and the big trees were going down. Everybody scrambling one room to the other to get out of range, I guess. My father had built a house trailer, and he got wind that it was going to be bad winds. So he dug 2 trenches so he could lower the trailer enough to get it in one of these little garages that they had, and got it in there. And the first thing that went flying was that garage. But he had managed to salvage by digging it a trench to get it low enough. It didn't go anywhere. And we used to use that to go into Pawcatuck. And then I moved into Bradford in 1940, I think it was. I was, I don't know, 10, 12 then. Then I worked for a farmer over here till I was 16. I used to pick potatoes. He used to grow a lot of potatoes. Get 2 cents a bushel for picking them up. Put them in the bushel basket, and they'd come along with a tractor and put them up on a little trailer that went in back of it. And everybody had a turn at the tractor because that was the easy job. So you picked up so many rows then you'd swap down, you know, and eventually everybody got to drive the tractor. But then I started in the mill on my 16th birthday. I worked there for 4 hours a night after school. February of 1944. And I worked there 4 hours a night right after school. And I used to be the one that used to clean all the motors, electric motors, and get them ready for reassembling. And they had a guy that worked as an electrician on that second shift. His name was Slim, but I can't think of his last name now. But at that time, being a teenager, don't like to take orders, you know.
Yeah.
But this guy liked his sauce, you know. And the boss would come up to me. He said, "Junior, can you take care of changing fuses, light bulbs?" I said, "Yeah." He says, "Slim won't be in tonight. I left orders not to let him in the mill. He's on one of his toots again." The boss would leave at 5 o'clock. About 10 after 5, here comes Slim. He walked right by the guards, you know, because they used to have security guards there. Come in. I said, "The boss says you weren't coming?" "Ah," he says, "I'll be all right." He turned the lights off in the shop. It was a little place off the machine shop. He turned the lights off, get up on the bench with a bundle of rags and go to sleep. And used to work with him, have to go work with him. But I tell you, at that time, I thought he was the miserablest son of a bitch that ever roamed this earth, you know. God Almighty. And God Almighty, he'd do anything to agitate, you know. I'd try to hold a flashlight while he was working on something, and all of a sudden he'd hit the flashlight. "Damn it," you know, growl at you. And I'd say something to him, and he always claimed he was deaf, you know. I found out one night that SOB is deaf. He give me a whack, you know, and I says, "You son of a bitch," you know, like that. And bang! Next thing I know, I'm flat on the floor. After that, I learned my lesson. Shut your mouth. But he used to come along on July. They would have a shutdown, and then all the maintenance crew would work and do all the jobs that couldn't be done while machinery was running. And the first year, I can remember, the boss used to keep a book of all the jobs, you know. And we used to sneak up and see what the hell jobs that we're going to have. And I'd go up there and, Jesus, Slim and Junior. Slim and Junior. Oh, Christ. I got to go with him 2 weeks again, you know. So I saw the boss. I said, "Stenny, could you do me a favor?" He says, "What?" "Put me with somebody else, will you, for these 2 weeks?" "I can't. I got everything all assigned." I said, "Oh, I can't work with that son of a bitch." He says, "Nobody else wants to work with him neither."
Yeah.
But he says, "I'm in a bind." I said, "Why?" "He particularly said he wants you as his helper." Holy Christ, you know. I was lost. But I found out after, no matter how bad he was showing me everything he knew. And that's something that stuck in the back of my mind. He had his method, you know. And his method was, listen to me and nobody else and shut up, you know. So anyway, that was one of my first lessons. I worked there until I had a family of 5 kids by then. Things were getting tight, money-wise. And I had to start looking because I couldn't survive down here. And somebody said, why don't you go over to EB? They're getting ready to hire again. So I went over there. I think it was $1.50 or $1.75 an hour more an hour than what I was making. And so that's why I moved. I told him I was going to go. And he says, well, we'd like you to stay. We're thinking of doing something with you. And I said, yeah, but I got to have money. I said, that's all I got to have is money. Well, we can't promise you that. So I was out of there for 11 years until my father got ready to retire. He was the boss of electricians. And they asked me if I was interested. I said, yeah, if the money's right. And I quoted them a few thousand more than what I was making at EB, and they matched it. And I was all ready to move, and I got another goddamn raise. So I told them, I said, I can't go because I just got a substantial raise. And they said, what is it? And I told them. They betted that again. So I didn't make my move then.
What year was that?
1970.
So then you went back to PDA from 1970?
70, the end of 70. I quit EB in November of 1970, and I told them I'd start the new year, 71, January. And I worked there until I retired in 1990, but they asked me if I was interested in being a consultant for them, because by then I was the plant engineer. So I said, yeah, but I said, I don't want to upset my Social Security, even though I'd quit at 62 and a half, because none of my family made retirement. And I was bound and possessed. I was going to have a couple years, you know. And I retired quite a loss, you know, in Social Security. But I told him, I says, as long I can remember the number, as long as I don't make more than $7,200 a year, okay.
So your father worked there too?
Yeah, yeah.
So when did he start there?
Oh, 1932, I believe. Yeah, my father started working there somewhere around 1932, as close as I can tell. He had been a railroad detective up to that point, and the money wasn't as good as what he could make there, even though they weren't paying nothing. And after I started working there, the second time, my oldest son was just going to college, and I got him a job there in the electrical department, and he was taking old electric conduit down. He spent the whole summer doing that. And then my middle son, he was just getting into high school, and he needed a part-time job. I got him a part-time job rebuilding the boxes of cloth that they wheeled around. And then he got into the electrical shop. Then he quit. He went to work for the post office. And that's who he's still working for, the post office. My oldest son went to Rensselaer, and he became a computer tech engineer.
So what were they making when you started working there?
They weren't making nothing. They were finishing cloth. They would take in what they call gray goods, which are goods that have been woven by a weaving mill, and they would process it all the way to the end. And once it left there, it was ready to be made into clothing or whatever.
So they dyed it?
Yeah.
Could you explain that process?
They were called a finisher, or which their term would be like a vertical operation. They take in at a certain stage and go all the way through and finish the cloth ready to be processed into dresses, pants, clothing, military. They were big in the military in World War II. I didn't realize it until another friend of mine gave me a collection of cloth that came out of a mill in Hope Valley that had been processed in World War I, military stuff, and on it was processed by Bradford Dyeing Association. So they had been doing it in both. And during World War II, there were over 1,200 people working there. They were top heavy in people to run machinery. And after the war, just like that, they went right down to, I think it was less than 200 for a while, and they kind of evened out at 200. They got their foot in on civilian stuff. And textiles is well known for all of a sudden this particular fabric or particular way to do something will appear, and everybody rushes to get into that, and then they get weeded out and only a few survive. And just before I got transferred back down there in the 70s, double knits was a big rage. Everything was single knit and double knits. The worst goddamn cloth in the world to process, believe me. First thing you do, you cut it this way and it roll right up in a bead, you know. And that's part of the process. But to process the machinery, they had to buy new machinery. And they had already bought about 75% of the new machinery they needed. And boom, there comes the oil crisis, and they tried to get out of the purchase of the last of the machinery, and they couldn't get out of it. So they got stuck with that bill, and the oil at a contract price that had been down here, now up here. That's why they shut down that first time, was that.
So have you heard anything on what's going to happen with the mill now?
I have, but I don't care to repeat it. But
oh, go ahead. Come on.
No, I'll tell you how to get around it.
Okay, go ahead.
Go and ask for Charleston on the internet, and in there you'll find a route to BDA written by a man that lives in Charleston. He used to be big in the Union, and he put out all the blurb about the guy that took over BDA.
Tell the story about when the guys wanted you to trace the pollution down in the river. That's a great story.
Oh.
So start in the beginning, like who was the guy, what year was it, and all that.
I don't know who the guy was, but the boss told me, we've got a complaint from DEM that we're causing suds in the river, soapy water. And he says, I want you to follow the river and find out where the hell it's coming from. Well, I had a video camera then. And I started following the river up. And I got up to where Wood River hits it. And I looked the first place there that I could see where it fell over a falls. It's soapy water. So I go up Wood River. I ended up all the way up into Arcadia. You ever been up there?
No.
That's in the friggin' boonies if you ever want to get in the boonies. And there was soapy water there. Any place that fell over a dam, you saw soapy water. So I came back to follow the Pawcatuck, and I got up into Shannick, and I was photographing the falls there in Shannick, and there was a guy fishing there, and of course he sees a video camera, you know. Well, what are you doing? So I told him, I'm just photographing different things. He says, look at that goddamn water. I said, what's the matter with the water? Look at all the crap in that water, and the soap and everything else. He said, that goddamn Bradford Dye's dumping all that shit in there and causing all this problem. The dumb son of a bitch, he's 8 miles above where they are, you know. I didn't say nothing. But, you know, some people, they deserved some of the stuff, but not entirely all of the crap that was going on. Really. Even though I worked there.
You never found where it was coming from?
No, never. It's in there. Even Kenyon, as that little dinky drop that's there, there was some there too. Wow. Everywhere, no matter where you go, it's got a little fall and you can see it.
So what was it like working in the mills back then? Was it good or bad or?
Yeah, it was, you know, you got to know most everybody, more or less. Like a lot of people, I've recognized that many people on the badges there. I got a list of them.
Oh, yeah.
And there's 63 names there that I can recall the faces and the names. I think there's one there that, what the hell did they call him? High Pockets. A lot of people I remembered by nicknames, you know. There was a guy in the dye house. To this day, I don't know his name. Used to call him Flash, but every time you walked by, he used to have one of these little stainless pails that he'd made out of cloth, a cushion. There he'd be sitting there, and his machine is going over. It's what they call a vessel, is dyeing the cloth, just going like this. And he sits there for hours, you know, while he's doing that. That's where he got his name, Flash. But that's the only thing I can remember him by. I don't know his name, but if you show me his face, I'll say, yeah, that's Flash, you know. But they had their own leagues, sports leagues. One I used to love was horseshoes. We used to have horseshoe throwing every week during the summer. They sponsored a baseball team and bowling. I used to do on their bowling. And they had card playing. What the hell was that? I forgot the name of the game now. We used to play over there in that place there by Burton's Barn that they burned down finally. Elks, was it?
Oh, okay.
I forget the name. I remember my brother-in-law played on the same team that I was on. And at the end of the year, they used to have a time, like, you know. And he says, it came up, you know. And this was a complete surprise to me. And he says, when got through all the team ones, and he says, now we have an individual, you know, you feel like pardon me, a horse's ass sitting there when they say this. We have one member here who's well known for getting all the good hands and everything else. And they go through all that rigmarole and hand it to me. Great big box. I open it up, another box. Jesus, get down to a box about this big. Open it up, it's a roll of shithouse paper. A note in it says, wipe your ass with this. Because I take a chance on anything in the cards, you know. Yeah. Well, we used to have good times, and you know, you get to know everybody's little things, and I didn't get along too well with one of the guys in the electric shop. What unknown reason to me, I don't know. But him and I were just like two cats on a hot tin roof, you know. And I gave him some shit one day, and he was pretty big size, bigger than you, and got a hold of me and his buddy, and they hooked me with a goddamn hook from a hoist. Yeah. Hoisted me up in the goddamn air, left me there. And you imagine trying to hold your weight up enough to get the. I couldn't do it. I kept hollering out. Finally, one of the machinists come in. The hell's you doing up there? Let's get me out here. But we used to have fun. Had another guy, his pictures in there, Larry Green. He was forever pulling jokes on people. He'd take a hot wire and go around to 200-watt lamps, and he'd heat that wire up and then dunk it in water and pop the top off it, you know. And he'd fill that up with a chemical, and then he'd tape it with another chemical. And then me and another guy were up on a platform off a 20-foot ladder working on an exhaust fan. Jesus Christ, I said, where the hell's all that smoke coming? Look at it, it's green. No, it's orange. That son of a bitch, he had taken 2 of these chemicals, these old lamps, and threw them over and popped them. When they did, you know, they made all this shitty smoke.
So, like, the machinery that was in, is the old wheel still in the old stone building there?
No, it wasn't there even before the England took it over in 1911 or 1910-11 when they bought the stone mill. They had a lawyer from New York City, and if this isn't a typical shyster's name for a lawyer, Rufus Stewart or something like that, I forget. But he came, the English were interested in getting a place to build because of the wool tariff. And they hired this Sprague, Rufus Sprague. I know it sounds like a shyster to me. But anyway, he came here in this area because they knew that they had a falls here, you know. And the guy had just died that owned that stone mill. He had 11 acres. And he came dressed as a farmer buying this property because they didn't want people to get wind of all of this going on. And he bought, I think it was a total of 500 acres on the Westerly side and 400 acres on the Hopkins side. And he bought it all under that pretense. He got away with it anyway, and they bought it pretty cheap, you know. And they started building with the thought in mind. In fact, 1910 New York Times article about the big dam that they were going to put. They were going to flood all kinds of acreage. They had bought what they called flowage rates also, and it never came to pass. They rebuilt the dam there enough so that they could keep feeding the canal that was running down alongside that he used to operate a small mill, a small textile mill, and a grist mill. And when they bought it, they got rid of the grist mill and a few other things, but that stone mill was there, and they used that for storing their chemicals and stuff. They started building. But what amazes me, that building went up for bid all through New England, and you know who got the bid for it? R.A. Sherman's in Westerly. But the bid was worded that if the New Haven and Hartford Railroad didn't provide a siding from their main track to the mill site, that all bids were off. Oh, the railroad built it because everything got hauled in, all the cement, all the timbers, everything came in by rail. That's how they got started with it, building it. They had 15 by 18 by 21 foot hard yellow pine timbers. You cut a piece off of that thing and it's all you can do is hold it, you know. Yeah. They all came by rail. I couldn't find any pictures other than one that was given to me at a show I did of construction. I have pictures of the 24-25 construction, and I dare you to find a piece of mechanized equipment in it. And you look at all the goddamn timbers that they put up. They had to have done it by boom and derrick. There's guys here with a wheelbarrow and a shovel. That's the biggest piece of equipment you can find is a wheelbarrow. Unbelievable. And they had to have like a granite derrick, you know what I'm saying? Yeah. They had to use a stick derrick, yeah.
All right, so 1911, up until that time, the mill had been just the stone building, is that?
The stone building and a few other small buildings, yes.
And it was run by water power then?
Some of it.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, but it still had the wheel and everything.
Yeah. They had a building. In fact, I got pictures of it here somewhere. It straddled the canal, what they called the canal, but there was a raceway. And
mill race.
Yeah, what we call a raceway. Yeah. And it straddled this raceway, and it had a undershot wheel in there that was operating that. But the thing about that is that particular part of the mill buildings that were there was granite. And the granite came from Chase Hill, from what I can find. I had a friend that swore he could tell where granite came from, you know. Yeah. And I took him on some tours around, and I just took him over the old mill. I said, where the hell did that come from? He says, see that? He says, that's all junk stone. He says, we used to call it White Horse. I said, what the hell do you call it White Horse for? I don't know, but that's what they used to call it. But he says, that White Horse came from Chase Hill. Huh. What was there, a white horse up there or something? No, he says, that's just a term for that, junk stone. He says, that's where that stone come from. And that was 1863 when that stone mill was built. So that granite had to come out of Chase Hill in that year. Okay? According to him. The Bradford quarries were Sullivan's and Crumb Quarry. They were called the Crumb Quarry before Sullivan bought them out.
The Pawcatuck River, you said in your book that over 240 vessels, goods,
were built there, yeah.
Yeah. How does that compare to other rivers in the area? Was that a lot? Was that unusual?
Unusual for this river, for this type of river, the depth and the distance in from. Yeah, there was over 240, I think 244 that I could find, but I know there was a lot more, just by hints, but I did go by hints, you know. The people that were mostly involved was the Greenman family, who had split up. They had been over, and Greenmans came from Charleston originally, and there was 4 brothers, I think. They went over to Mystic to build ships because that was the best place at that particular time. And the oldest one split off from them and ended up in Westerly and started building ships. And there was 2 brothers that also started a little after them, the Sheffields. Between those 2, they built the most of them. Surprisingly, the biggest ones were built almost up close to the bridge. But in order to get them down the river, there were notes in. I'll tell you how isolated it can get. They built a vessel called the Mud Digger, which that's what it did. It dig a trench down the river so they could get ships in and out of the river. And in their documentation, there's notes here and there sent over to Mystic for casks for the ship launching. Yeah. And they'd use these casks to lighten the ship, bring it up enough to get it over all the junk in the river. But this Mud Digger, they built on speculation. Anybody that owned mills or anything else along the river that wanted goods delivered by them or by vessels or anything like that had to pay a price for so much per foot or whatever.
What's that? How did they dig the mud? What kind of, you know?
It was very vague on it, but what I can gather out of it, it was run by 6 horses. Well, I know 6 didn't operate at one time. It was probably 3 on and 3 off or something like that.
Walking the wheel.
Horizontal.
Yeah.
And all they were doing, they would dig, dump, dig, dump. So what happens when the water starts?
Comes back in again.
It comes back in again.
So wait a second, these horses were on the ship going around in a circle,
Yeah.
digging holes in the mud so the ships can go down?
Yeah, yep. So they'd have room to get up the river and back out again. They had one of them vessels, if you look at it, I think it was the name, Lavaca. It was named after a port in Texas that they used to go to. We think of, they didn't go anywhere.
Yeah.
These SOBs were everywhere, you know. You know, they thought nothing of getting in these little dinky things and going around the world in them, you know, and hunt them stupid whales and everything else. And but that particular one, I remember, on board when they tried to get out of the river was George Babcock of Babcock and Wilcox. Yeah.
The Boilermakers.
Boilermaker. Well, he had started the newspaper in Westerly, and him and Wilcox finally got together. But if I had to compare them 2 people, Stephen Wilcox and George Babcock of that B&W, George Babcock was the salesman, the bullshitter, and Wilcox was the inventor. And that's the way I followed through on everything I could find. But that was all kinds of stuff. I can go branch from one to the other, and, you know, I get lost in them sometimes.
So what was the biggest ship built in the Pawcatuck River?
Tonnage capacity, I think, was somewhere right close to 500 tons.
So that's the size of the Morgan or something?
Oh, the Morgan's only a 370 ton vessel. I think it was somewhere around 370. That's burden or carrying capacity. They built one clipper ship. It didn't last too long, a couple of years. There was 5 whaling vessels. There was a merchant vessel that they built that used to go all the way to Murmansk, Russia. Imagine that. I wouldn't go to the end of the river on one of them things, but then it transferred over into the whaling fleet because whaling was making big money, you know, in that particular era. So there was transferring back and forth. God, you can read all kinds of stuff about them.
So do you say that Charles Phelps is probably the most famous ship in the...
Yeah, my opinion, yeah. A lot of people in Westerly never heard of the damn thing, you know.
And was that built in the Pawcatuck River?
Yeah, yeah. Like I said, in the book you got, you might have a dozen pages or maybe even 3 or 4 pages. Look at what I got there, you know.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. The river was the key, right?
Oh yeah.
So can you talk about the early history stuff about the river? You know, how it all evolved, or what you think is the most interesting thing about the river in Westerly?
As early as 1810, maybe, there were advertisements for boarding a sloop to go to New York. And these were weekly basis where the businessmen in Westerly, with few there were, would get on to go and buy their goods to bring back. Almost all the goods, in fact all the goods came out by water, mostly up this river. Coal, which was very important for the mills operating that needed coal. They had C.B. Cottrell, the print and press company, needed coal for theirs. They had a mill next to them they called the steam mill because they didn't have no water power in that area. The other mills were dependent on water power, but the river provided all their other stuff. And one of the big things that a lot of people forget about, what did you do with food then? How did you keep it from spoiling? The magic word, ice. The river provided ice. You wouldn't take it out now, but I have some articles about in the 1880s where they were harvesting 15-inch thick ice out of the river.
Storing it in soda.
Yeah. And there were ice houses up and down the river. There was a sea captain, a whaling captain, by the name of George W. Bliven. I got stuff on him here somewhere. He lost his ship in one of the ice disasters in Alaska, and he became an iceman. And he had a place in Wood River Junction because that was the coldest place, but it was also near the railroad. And the railroad was the transporter by that time, in 1840s, 50s. So one thing ties into another, you know what I'm saying? The goods, fish was a big thing too. Now they're talking about taking out more dams on the river. My own personal feeling is somewhere along the line that river isn't going to be like this, it's going to be like this. You know? Like, you can read about the Indians here in Bradford, which was called Shuttock's Weir. You know what a weir is? Bunch of sticks stuck in the water to trap a fish. So that tells me there's no drop in the river there, and it's very narrow.
Placid.
Yeah, yeah, right, placid. Yeah. That's the right word. I think that's what you're going to end up with.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's like the river supplied basically everything in the beginning, like fish, ice, transportation, they built the ships, they used the ships to transport the goods, the coal from New York, and then ship the goods that they made in the mills by ship down the river up until what, 1840, 1850, and then the railroad took over? Is that how it worked?
Yes and no.
Okay, explain it to me
The
then.
railroad bit into the business quite a bit, but also they could still ship by water cheaper, and that's where the railroads came into working their rates to get everybody out. Just for instance, what happened, they had a trolley line started in the 1890s, and within a year that trolley line started to disappear because the railroads chopped their prices. But on the river, they had a lot of steamboat traffic by then. It was running from Westerly into Watch Hill for tourist season, and they had 1 or 2 years out of the trolley line before the railroad beat them out of that. How they beat them out of it, they dropped their price so bad, and then they hire somebody in Stonington to take them by boat from Stonington over to Watch Hill, and still beat them price.
The railroads didn't go any further than Stonington.
Right.
But they were inland.
Yeah, but
not along
by
the
that
coast.
time, they had established one line all the way into Providence.
Yeah.
So they were competing against the ships, basically.
Yeah.
So the ships were the major source, and then once the railroads, they cut the prices and they beat the ships out.
Made them less important,
Right.
but they still were important because they could do it cheaper. They were hauling coal from Virginia. In fact, still a big area. Norfolk, in those days, was a big area for the coal to go into. I would say that they finally got them, but it took them a while, you know, and because their rates couldn't compete with some of the sailing vessels, not the ones built here. There's others coming in, you know.
Right.
But in order to beat the prices, how they beat the prices, number one, was any coal that came in didn't come up by vessel, by a sailing vessel. They came up by a barge. So they were brought up in barges, and these barges had like the General Grant was one of them, and all kinds of real fancy names, but all they were was a barge where they could dump their coal onto, you know.
Oh, and they came up the Pawcatuck River? Now, where did they land on the river?
What they called the landing, which is roughly right about where Beach and Margin Street meet, Main Street, right in that area. That big place there was, that big house or big building was originally a sail loft. Then it became the lower part of it was a dry goods store that was run by a Captain William C. Pendleton. I got his picture here somewhere, but he was a dour-looking bird. You wouldn't want to meet him in a dark alley, you know.
Let's sum it up, I guess. Like wrap it up. You know, well, what do you think? I mean, you got any final thoughts on all this stuff? The mills, the ships.
Oh, geez, I didn't put in one of the most important ones. Have you ever heard of the Worden Farm Improvement Company? No, nobody has. But I got it here.
Worden Pond.
Yeah, you know where Worden Pond is?
It's up in West Kingston.
Yeah, Great Swamp.
Yeah.
They wanted to drain the Great Swamp and make farmland out of it.
Wow.
You know what?
That was where the Indian War was, too.
You know what? All the mill owners on the river squawked like a son of a bitch about it because they were afraid that draining the Great Swamp was going to take a lot of the water away from the Pawcatuck River. The river during flood season was really no good to them because there was no head, you know.
Yeah.
The drier season, like in the fall or whatever, spring, not spring, but they had 2 seasons, but they were definitely afraid of losing their water rights. And they went this went all the way to the General Assembly. Typical now. I'm telling you, it's typical bullshit. And they hired, the improvement company hired this well-known engineer, hydraulic engineer. I forget his name now. H.F. Shedd. S-H-E-D-D. What a guy to have in water rights, right? But anyway, and they go all the way, and all of a sudden, I trace some newspapers. That's a son of a bitch, you know.
Yeah.
And right up into the General Assembly, guess what? General Assembly approved it. But after that, you can't find shit about it.
Yeah.
So what happened to it, I don't know.
Huh. What year was this?
18,
So there was a lot of big plans for the river, like you had mentioned in 1910, when the guy came over posing as the farmer.
Yep.
He was representing the people from England, right?
yeah,
Was the village called Dorville or something at that time, and then they changed it to Bradford?
it was Niantic by then. It had been Dorville, but the Vaz family fought it and got it changed back to Niantic, which it had been before Dorville. And then the English got it changed to Bradford because when it was changed to Niantic, 30 miles away in Connecticut is Niantic. Half the freight that was being delivered would end up over there. Okay, so the railroad says, oh, we'll fix that. We'll call it the Charleston Depot. So it was called Charleston Depot only for the railroad's advantage for a while. That's why they wanted it changed.
So let's sum it up. So you're on your whole experience working in the mills, studying the history of Westerly. If you had to sum up the whole thing, how would you do it?
A lot went on that nobody realizes the importance of to this day. Even though it's disappeared into the background, way in the background, there's still a lot of contributions from past history in the area that nobody knows anything about. That's what the Westerly Historical Society is all about, and they're trying to preserve that. My collection, images, and all of the other stuff that I've got is going to them, and that's what I'm in the process of trying to do.
Right. Great. That is a very noble
Yeah, well,
and important
I got 30, 35 years in it, and my kids are not that interested in it, and I don't want them saddled with it. My wife died a little over a year ago, and up to the time that she had her first problem, we had bought a new car. We were going to go on some trips. We hadn't been on a vacation in umpteen years, and boom, the rug got pulled out from under us. And thank God I had a couple sons that took over, and they ironed out most of my estate problems, and I had to hire lawyers and everything else, but they've got it pretty well straightened out, and that's what I told them I wanted to do, and that's in my paperwork. As far as my paintings, I could give a shit less where they go. Most of them, my family's claimed quite a few of them. They were already gone. I got somewhere around 70 of them still in the house here somewhere.
Where'd you find all the time to do all this?
Well, I had to find time to get rid of the pressure from work.
Yeah.
And history, painting, that was my way of getting out of it,
Yeah.
And you don't know how many canvases I crushed up afterwards, because I got into them what I felt, and they weren't worth a shit, But anyway, I got my enjoyment out of it that way.